When big stories develop, we often warn you, watch the other hand, because that's when this administration can and does slip in some of their most controversial agenda items unnoticed. So while Egypt was on fire, what has the other hand been doing? Well, on Friday, in a significant victory for federal employee unions, the Federal Labor Relations Authority decided that the TSA staffers will be allowed to vote on union representation. The decision clears the way for a campaign by the government's two largest labor union organizations, the American Federation of Government Employees and the National Treasury Employees Union, to represent 50,000 transportation security officers. Now, let's get this right. The TSA will be union. May I remind you that we all said that could not happen. When Congress created the Homeland Security Department, it specifically ruled out collective bargaining rights for screeners. When they were becoming federal employees under the TSA, we said no. Why? Well, for a couple of reasons. First of all, we should be able to fire people, right? I mean, shouldn't we have the ability to fire people if they're not doing the job? And you also wouldn't want to unionize the nation's security team, because, man, it's almost like they become a defense force, isn't it? And not for you. If people aren't doing their jobs, you got to be able to fire them. Try that once the union takes over. Can't do it in schools. What makes you think you can do it when they screen people? But also, understand one thing. Understand the power that you are giving these unions. We warned you that this would happen when we talked about Greece last summer. Because Greece, remember, they couldn't get gas. People couldn't go on the trains. They were having a hard time at the airport. At the time, we played you the videotape. I think it was in Los Angeles, but here is yet another one. This one's from Houston's Communist Party and what they had to say about the labor unions over in Europe. Quote, "We particularly like to salute the Greek Communist Party, its labor federation and allies left, and People's Forces for their heroic role in the resistance to the reactionary capitalist offensive. They are fighting our fight and merit our support and gratitude." Basically, what the unions were doing was making sure that you couldn't get gas if you were over in Europe. Unionizing the TSA, while potentially disastrous for the country, is going to be great for the unions, because the union membership has been going down. But now they'll have 50,000 potential new members and as much as $30 million a year of your money. You see, you pay the screener, they pay the union. I wonder how much of that money will be spent in America and how much will be spent overseas organizing revolutions. Oh, I'm sure it has nothing to do with this particular push. I'm sure over in Egypt, it's all about workers' rights. Sure. And speaking of unions, AFL-CIO head Richard Trumka wrote to the Real Estate Tax Authority in Egypt, the workers' president, and to the director of the independent Egyptian labor group, the Center for Trade Union Worker Services, and he supported their uprising there. He said, quote, "Their organizations symbolize the strength and the courage of the Egyptian workers and their families who have been standing up to repression for many, many years. We salute you in this brave endeavor, forming the new Labor Federation, and join the international labor movement in standing with you." That's fantastic. That's fantastic. By the end of the week, that will make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. The People's Movement for Democracy in Egypt and the role the unions are playing for freedom and workers' rights, he says, inspire us and will not be forgotten. He then concludes, democracy will rise up. Really? Sounds beautiful. Democracy. The People's Movement for Democracy. Wow, that even sounds better. It sounds almost, I don't know, Chinese, doesn't it? I feel very confident that the workers in Egypt will absolutely thrive under a new government formed by these guys and supported by all of these guys. It's going to be fantastic. Look at the wonderful freedoms enjoyed by the Iranians after their Islamic Revolutionary Council took over. And unions and workers, oh, that's great. That's great. The unions, they'll think that They're dealing with John Adams and Patrick Henry by the time the Brotherhood seizes control. And just like with our founders, there will come real trouble. Our founders, by the way, weren't community organizers. But in Egypt, it all comes down to community organizing. In fact, all of this comes down to community organizing. But you have to look at countries as communities, a borderless world, and then overlay community organizing. And things start to make sense. We'll show you next. All right, what role does community organizing play? When we think of community organizing, we think of just people getting together to help people, right? Or we think that's ridiculous. But that's, first of all, it's not ridiculous. But there's a pattern here. Do you remember this? This is community organizing at its best. One nation working together. Here's all of these groups. They don't agree with each other. They don't believe in the same thing. Some of them are communists, some of them are green, some are progressives. But they all agree on one thing. They all disagree with the Western way of life to one degree or another. But they mostly agree on being anti-capitalist. And they can all agree that, individuals just can't be left to pursue their own success alone. They can't do it. Now, take this American coalition that is changing America in the cover of darkness. You don't know it. Most Americans don't know they're being manipulated. And if you understand that they've all made a deal with another, and they've all tolerated each other for an end goal. They put their differences aside for the end game. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Then you understand, or begin to, what is happening. The same thing is happening in Egypt. That's what these groups have done to some degree or another. Al Jazeera, Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, the April 6th youth movement, the revolutionary socialists in Egypt. We have some demands from the socialists of Egypt. And I want you to listen to some of these demands and see if you've heard any similarities to the community here in America. Listen, this is the revolutionary socialist in Egypt. Glory to the martyrs, victory to the revolution. Mubarak's departure is the first step, not the last step. The country's wealth belongs to the people and must return to it. Glory to the martyrs, system, down with the system, all power to the people, victory to the revolution, blah, 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 blah. I mean, does any of this sound like a pro-democracy, pro-freedom declaration? Not to me. But these groups, and so many more, have organized what's called a shadow parliament. Look it up. Do your own research. We'll be talking about that in detail tomorrow and the next day. And the cobbling of these groups together, the activists, the labor unions, the radicals, they all came together because they can agree on one thing. The Western way of life is over. And each of them think they have the answer. Well, they're good at causing chaos. More on that next. Now, I would think that if I were you, I would be asking, okay, so Glenn Beck, why are you the only one talking about this and connecting the dots? And so many prominent people, and some of them on the right, not agreeing with you. I can't answer that question. I don't know. Other than they have all of this information, but they're refusing to connect the dots for some reason or another. It is an awful lot of work, and you do have to think out of the box. And also, all of these groups have plausible deniability. They're all under one umbrella, one nation, without having to have the same beliefs. Quite possibly, a group that is more dangerous, even that of the Muslim Brotherhood, it's an offshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, because the Muslim Brotherhood wasn't violent enough, is this group. It is Hizbut Tahrir. This is a group that seeks to reestablish the caliphate, or golden age of Islamic rule, through political means. Hizbut Tahrir says it prefers to achieve its goal of a new caliphate through persuasion, protests, and political organizing. Now, these are not people, and I want to show you this, these are not people that are speaking out just in the Middle East. No. They're actually holding a conference here on this videotape in Illinois. Watch.
Takbir. Takbir. Secular capitalism, the evil, sick, twisted ideology that is the root cause of today's problems.
That's called Islamic socialism. Now, you can bury your head in the sand or, plug your ears, pretend these things aren't happening and there's no connection, or you can look for the patterns. The pattern is people who were in the 90s were very outrageous, but then started to cobble themselves together and then toned it down. It's like Van Jones said, quote, "I'm willing to forego the cheap satisfaction of the radical pose for the deep satisfaction of the radical ends." They stand together as one nation or one world, but you have to do your own homework. You'll find all of tonight's research at glennbeck.com. You can read about Islamic socialism, the history of the caliphate, and economic ramifications of what's happening in Egypt to you. And you'll get the Muslim Brotherhood in their own words. Educate yourself at glennbeck.com. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit about the shadow parliament in Egypt and its connections here. And hopefully we can get to what really started this uprising, something you haven't heard anyplace else. That's on tomorrow's program. Make sure you run the DVR from New York. Good night, America.